Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next stories. Share this video with someone who loves emotional and inspiring tales, and let's dive in. Mia Rivera had grown used to mornings that felt more like an extension of the night than a beginning. When her alarm rattled across the chipped nightstand at 5:30, she didn't so much wake up as she returned to consciousness from a light broken doze that never offered rest. The gray light of early dawn leaked through thin curtains, dust spiraling lazily in the air, and her small bedroom felt both too quiet and too cramped. She sat on the edge of her bed, running a hand over her face, feeling the weight under her eyes before she even looked into the mirror nailed crookedly to her wall. When she finally did, the reflection staring back at her looked older than a 21-year-old architecture student should. But exhaustion had become so intertwined with her identity that she had almost forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. She dressed quickly, pulling on the same faded jeans she wore to class every week, and a simple t-shirt she hoped looked clean enough. Money was too scarce for new clothes, and she had more pressing worries than appearances. Her backpack lay at the foot of the bed, a worn-out canvas relic frayed at the seams, packed with textbooks, sketch rolls, and a laptop that lagged every time she tried to run design software. As she stepped into the hallway of the small apartment, she heard the low hum of the refrigerator, a constant reminder of its age and the possibility that it might die at any moment, just like everything else in their household that was one breakdown away from being irreparable. In the kitchen, her mother sat quietly with a blanket draped over her lap, hands cupped around a mug of tea that was more warm water than anything else. The morning light revealed the pallor of her skin, the hollow under her cheekbones, the effort it took her just to sit upright. Her illness had progressed slowly but relentlessly, carving away strength day by day. Mia tried not to stare, but she couldn't help cataloging every tremor, every wince, every moment her mother's breath hitched. The medications were expensive, the tests even more so, and they were long past the point of being able to afford what doctors insisted was necessary. Her younger sister, Sophia, rushed around the small kitchen table packing her school books. She moved with the kind of energy only teenagers still possessed, but beneath that energy was worry. It showed in the way she sometimes glanced at their mother when she thought Mia wasn't looking, or how she stayed up late finishing homework because she refused to complain about anything that might add to the stress already permeating the family. Mia grabbed a piece of toast, half-eaten from yesterday, because throwing food away felt like a luxury they no longer had. She swallowed it quickly, ignoring the dryness, and checked the time again. A full day of classes awaited her, followed by another night shift at the diner. Her eyes stung at the thought. There were moments, fleeting but sharp, when she wondered how much longer she could keep juggling everything: school, work, bills, illness, and the knowledge that their father's death had set everything spiraling into survival mode with no end in sight. The morning bus was crowded, loud, and smelled faintly of engine oil. Mia sat near the window, watching neighborhoods shift from worn-out apartment complexes like hers to neatly maintained houses whose lawns seemed to glow under the rising sun. She watched students with expensive backpacks board the bus near the university district, chatting easily, laughing about weekend plans, oblivious to the kind of financial cliff she lived on every day. She often felt invisible among them, as though she moved through campus like a ghost who didn't belong to their world. Architecture school demanded time she didn't have and materials she could barely afford. Every project required foam boards, specialty paper, modeling supplies, software licenses, printing fees. The list seemed endless. While her classmates walked into studios with sleek laptops and professional drawing tablets, Mia pulled out her old second-hand device that whirred loudly and overheated after an hour of use. She felt their glances, sometimes subtle, pitying, or confused, when she apologized for late submissions or rushed in wearing her diner uniform under a hoodie. She tried not to let it undermine her confidence, but architecture was a field obsessed with aesthetics, including the appearance of the people studying it, and she knew she stood out in ways that didn't work in her favor. Her first class of the day involved presenting conceptual sketches for a community center design. She'd worked on hers during breaks at the diner, sketching by dim kitchen lights while waiting for orders. When her turn came, she unfolded the pages of her sketchbook, hands trembling from fatigue. She explained her vision, trying to push past the self-consciousness pressing in on her. The professor listened, arms crossed, offering a polite but distant nod. When she finished, he gave a non-committal comment about needing refinement. The feedback wasn't harsh, but it lacked the encouragement she desperately needed. It was the kind of response that reminded her how precarious her place in the program felt. Classes dragged on until the afternoon, each hour stretching longer as her body fought to stay alert. By the time she boarded the bus home, her head throbbed from lack of sleep, and her stomach clenched with hunger she didn't have time to satisfy. She arrived home just long enough to check on her mother and sister, change into her uniform, and head back out for her night shift. The diner was a world of its own: fluorescent lights, greasy countertops, clattering plates, and customers who treated it as an escape from their own lives. Mia moved through the noise on autopilot, refilling coffees, taking orders, wiping tables. Her coworkers knew she was juggling school and family, but sympathy didn't lighten her workload. People needed their meals and she needed the paycheck, however small. When the manager asked her to stay an extra hour because someone had called in sick, she didn't even consider refusing. That extra hour could pay for a bus pass or part of a medical bill. It was near closing time when her coworker Natalie leaned against the counter during a rare lull and mentioned a fundraising gala happening that weekend. It was being hosted by a major real estate investor and philanthropist, someone whose name Mia recognized from local news stories about redevelopment projects and charity work. Natalie encouraged her to go, claiming it could open doors or at least offer a night of free food. Mia laughed it off at first, assuming she would look ridiculous in her thrift store clothing among people wearing gowns worth more than her annual rent. But Natalie persisted, insisting that mingling with wealthy professionals could be beneficial for her future career. The idea sounded absurd. Mia had no place in that world. She barely had the clothes to attend a simple campus event, let alone a formal gathering. Yet the thought lingered, nagging at her during her bus ride home. Her life felt stagnant, as though she were stuck in a loop she couldn't escape. Maybe, she thought, stepping outside her comfort zone could lead somewhere unexpected. The next day, she sifted through her closet, pulling out the plainest, cleanest outfit she owned. It wasn't formal by any means, but at least it looked intentional. She told her mother about the gala in vague terms, not wanting to raise expectations, but her mother encouraged her with a tired but hopeful smile. That alone pushed Mia to follow through. When she arrived at the venue, a grand hotel downtown with polished marble floors and shimmering chandeliers, she immediately regretted coming. The lobby alone radiated wealth. Guests arrived in sleek cars and stepped out in tailored suits and shimmering dresses. She lingered near the entrance, fighting the urge to turn around and flee, but she pushed herself forward, telling herself she could at least stay long enough to eat something before her nerves overcame her. Inside, the crowd buzzed with polite laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations filled with technical jargon about investments, development projects, charitable partnerships, and industry trends. Mia wandered along the edges of the event, trying not to look overwhelmed. She felt painfully out of place, a stranger in a space designed for people with money, connections, and social ease. No one noticed her, and she preferred it that way. She couldn't imagine striking up conversations with people who looked like they'd never experienced a moment of financial insecurity in their lives. As she slipped farther into the ballroom, she found a quiet corner where she could observe without being observed. It didn't last long. She felt someone's gaze and turned slightly, realizing an older man stood nearby, watching the crowd with an expression that didn't quite match the atmosphere. His posture was dignified yet slightly tired, and a thoughtful heaviness lingered in his eyes. She recognized him immediately from news articles and philanthropic newsletters. Arthur Lancaster, the host of the event and one of the most respected figures in the state's real estate development circles. He seemed to be studying the room the way one might study a blueprint, looking deeper than the surface. Mia tried to look away, but he noticed her hesitation and approached with a calm demeanor that didn't carry the typical arrogance she had seen in other wealthy guests. His presence was commanding yet strangely gentle, and when he began speaking to her, it was not in the rehearsed tone of someone addressing strangers at an event, but in the sincere manner of someone genuinely curious. Mia found herself sharing pieces of her life without entirely understanding why. She spoke about her studies, her dreams of designing spaces for people who had been overlooked by the system, her family's struggles, and how every day felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Arthur listened with an attention that felt foreign to her, measured, patient, without judgment. He asked questions that revealed he understood the complexities of the issues she mentioned, from affordable housing shortages to community infrastructure failings. She didn't expect anything to come from the interaction. People like Arthur Lancaster met hundreds of young people at events like this, offering them encouraging smiles before moving on and forgetting them by the next morning. So when she left the hotel later that night, stepping back into the cool Houston air, she assumed the evening had simply given her a brief escape from her routine and nothing more. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion as she struggled to keep up with classes, work, and home responsibilities. She barely thought about the gala at all, except for a few fleeting moments when she wondered why she had spoken so openly to a stranger. But life quickly consumed her attention again, her mother's worsening fatigue, her sister's mounting anxiety about school, her own slipping grades. The gala faded into memory. It wasn't until late afternoon 2 days later, while she was washing dishes after class and preparing to head to the diner for another shift, that her phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. She nearly ignored it, assuming it was a scam or a bill collector, but something made her swipe to answer. The voice on the other end was unmistakably Arthur's, measured, warm, and unexpectedly direct. He said he wanted to continue their conversation and invited her to his home to discuss something important. Mia froze in the tiny kitchen, staring at the peeling paint on the wall as though it might offer her guidance. She couldn't imagine why he would want to see her again, but she heard sincerity in his voice, not the hollow politeness common among wealthy donors. After a long moment, she agreed, her heart trembling with the same mixture of fear and curiosity that had guided her to the gala in the first place. She didn't yet know that this phone call would become the hinge on which her entire life would turn. Everything leading up to it, the exhaustion, the struggle, the tiny fragile hopes she still clung to, had been preparing her for a moment she couldn't yet understand. And as she stood in her quiet kitchen, surrounded by the signs of a life that seemed fixed in hardship, she felt something unfamiliar stir inside her. Not relief, not confidence, something quieter, more fragile. Possibility. It was the first shift in a story she did not yet realize had already begun. The call from Arthur lingered in Mia's mind long after she ended it. She stood motionless in the narrow kitchen, still holding the dish towel in her hand, staring at the muted reflection of herself in the dark window. The city lights outside flickered faintly as evening settled over Houston, and the familiar sounds of cars rolling down the street drifted into the apartment. She felt suspended between fear and curiosity, unsure of what she had just agreed to. She knew little about the man other than what she had seen in the media and what little she had sensed during their brief conversation. Yet something about his voice had convinced her that he did not extend invitations lightly. It was as if he had been waiting to speak with her again, as though their meeting at the gala had stirred something in him that required continuation. When she finally left for work, her mind remained fogged with questions. She moved through her shift distracted and unsteady, her thoughts wandering back to the same point again and again. What could a man like Arthur Lancaster possibly want from her? Why would someone of his stature take interest in someone like her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and every explanation she imagined only seemed more implausible than the one before it. By the time she returned home that night, exhausted and smelling faintly of grease, she had made no progress in understanding his intentions. The following morning came too quickly. Mia barely slept, tossing between nervous anticipation and dread. She considered calling and canceling more than once, convincing herself it was a mistake, that she had misunderstood, that agreeing to meet him was foolish. But each time she began to write the message, she stopped. She couldn't ignore the sense that this meeting mattered, even if she didn't yet comprehend why. When the afternoon came, she left early, uncertain of how long it would take to reach Arthur's home. She couldn't afford a taxi, and buses only went so far. From the last stop, she walked along a quiet suburban road that eventually curved toward a long, tree-lined driveway. At its end stood a house so striking that it seemed part of another world entirely. Large but understated, The home blended contemporary architecture with a sense of solidity and history. Tall windows reflected the sky, and soft garden paths wound around carefully tended shrubs. It felt less like a display of wealth and more like a sanctuary built with intention. Her hesitance intensified as she approached the door. She rang the bell, listening to the muted chime echo inside. A moment later, the door opened and Arthur appeared, leaning slightly on a cane she hadn't noticed at the gala. His expression held the same gentleness she remembered, but up close she could see the subtle signs of fatigue that etched his features. She wondered if he had always looked this frail, or if she hadn't noticed before. He welcomed her with the same calm manner he had used the night they met. Once inside, Mia found herself in a space that reflected his taste, an interplay of wooden textures, neutral colors, and large shelves filled with books. Artwork adorned the walls, not in the way of museum pieces hung to impress, but in a way that suggested emotional significance. Everything was arranged intentionally and carefully. The house felt lived in, imbued with stories rather than luxury. Arthur led her into a sitting room filled with soft natural light that poured through a wide window overlooking the garden. He moved slowly, but not helplessly, each motion purposeful. When he invited her to sit, she chose a chair across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As much as she wanted to compose herself, her heart beat faster than she could control. He noticed her tension but said nothing about it, allowing the moment to settle. They spoke first of simple things. He asked about her classes, her architecture projects, her mother's health, and her sister's schoolwork. He listened intently to each answer, with a kind of patience she wasn't accustomed to receiving. But behind his questions, she sensed an undercurrent of something more. She knew the conversation was leading somewhere, and he wasn't yet ready to reveal where. It wasn't until several minutes of quiet discussion had passed that his demeanor shifted. He straightened slightly in his chair, exhaled slowly, and looked at her with a solemnity that tightened the air between them. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight different from before, a gravity that told her what he was about to share was deeply personal. He began by telling her he was dying. There was no hesitation, no embellishment, no attempt to soften the words. They hung in the air, pressing into Mia's chest with a heaviness she hadn't expected. He explained his diagnosis, the treatments that had failed, the timeline doctors had given him. He spoke with a calm acceptance that made her even more uneasy. It wasn't the resignation of someone defeated, but rather the clarity of someone who had made peace with an unavoidable truth. She felt a wave of conflicting emotions, sorrow, confusion, and a strange fear that this revelation was somehow connected to her. When she finally found the strength to ask why he was telling her this, his explanation unfolded slowly, revealing pieces of a life she hadn't imagined. Arthur told her about his career, how he had risen from a modest background to become one of the most influential developers in the region. He shared how his marriage had shaped him, how losing his wife had left an emptiness that business couldn't fill. As he spoke, she saw a man whose achievements had come with equal measures of sacrifice and loneliness. He described the turning point when he realized that building cities wasn't just about profit, it was about the people who lived within them. That realization had led him to form the Lancaster Urban Renewal Foundation, dedicated to improving underserved communities, funding educational programs, supporting small businesses, and rehabilitating neglected neighborhoods. He told her how deeply he believed in the foundation's mission, how much of himself he had poured into its work, and how important it was that the right person continued leading it when he was gone. He confided that he had no close family capable of taking over. His relatives were distant, either uninterested or fundamentally misaligned with what he valued. The board of directors was capable but fractured, more focused on preserving budgets and maintaining appearances than advancing the foundation's true purpose. He feared that once he passed, the foundation would lose its direction, swallowed by bureaucracy or co-opted by those who valued financial gain over community welfare. His voice wavered briefly when he spoke of this possibility, revealing the sorrow that the thought brought him. Only then did he explain why he had reached out to her. When he met her at the gala, he said he had recognized something familiar, a type of resilience he had rarely seen. It wasn't the hardened resilience born from bitterness, but the quiet, persistent determination of someone who refused to give up, even when the world gave her every reason to. He admired the clarity with which she spoke about the needs of marginalized communities, the sincerity of her desire to create spaces that uplifted rather than displaced. Her perspective, shaped by hardship rather than privilege, was exactly what he believed the foundation needed. Mia listened, stunned. His words struck her as too generous, too idealistic, too misplaced. She was only a struggling student, fighting to keep her own life from collapsing. She had no qualifications to run a major philanthropic organization. The idea alone was absurd. Yet Arthur continued, undeterred by her disbelief. He told her he wanted her to inherit his foundation. The room seemed to tilt around her. She blinked, unsure if she had misunderstood. But Arthur went on, explaining that legally transferring the foundation, its assets and control to her, would be complicated under traditional inheritance structures. He had relatives who would challenge his decisions, lawyers who would contest documents, and board members who might attempt to undermine her authority. There was, however, one simple, indisputable way to ensure the transition occurred smoothly and immediately. Marriage. Mia felt the breath leave her lungs. The word echoed, heavy and surreal. Marriage. He said it plainly, as though it were a practical arrangement, nothing more. He didn't pretend it would be conventional. He had no expectation of affection or romance. It was a legal bond, a mechanism. And in exchange, he would use his resources to help her family, ensuring her mother received the medical treatment she needed, helping Sophia prepare for college, stabilizing their financial situation so Mia wouldn't have to drown under its weight. He spoke with a calm certainty, yet there was a hint of vulnerability beneath his tone. He wasn't asking for charity or companionship. He was asking her to become the guardian of everything he had built. For a long moment, Mia couldn't speak. She felt suspended between disbelief and dread, her thoughts colliding in chaotic swirls. She tried to imagine herself assuming such a responsibility, tried to imagine the scrutiny, the whispers, the questions. She pictured her mother's face, her sister's future, the mounting bills, the sleepless nights, the gnawing fear that had become a constant presence. And she pictured saying no, returning to her life exactly as it was, with no possibility of change. Arthur did not pressure her. He told her to take all the time she needed to consider. He said he understood the enormity of what he was asking. When she left his home, she carried with her a burden she hadn't asked for, but couldn't set down. The following days were some of the most agonizing of her life. She replayed everything he had said, feeling the weight of each sentence like a stone pressing against her ribs. The offer felt both like an escape and a trap. It promised salvation for her family, but demanded a price she wasn't sure she had the right to pay. It violated every idea she had about what marriage was supposed to be, about autonomy, dignity, and selfhood. Yet refusing meant condemning her mother to worsening illness, her sister to limited opportunities, and herself to a future defined by struggle. She cried more in those days than she had in years. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, picturing different futures, none of which she recognized as her own. When she tried to imagine telling her mother, she felt ashamed. When she tried to imagine not telling her, she felt guilty. Eventually, she did confide in her mother, not with specifics, but with the essence of the offer. Her mother's reaction was not anger or confusion, but a quiet, strained sorrow. She understood, perhaps even better than Mia did, the sacrifices required to give a family a chance at survival. She reminded Mia that life rarely offers choices without cost, and that sometimes dignity lies not in refusing the unconventional, but in deciding what one will do with it. One evening, after days of torment, Mia stood at the bus stop on her way home from class. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and the air hummed with the distant sound of traffic. She looked up at the sky, feeling the exhaustion seep into her bones, and in that moment she understood that she couldn't keep living as she had been. She couldn't continue juggling a future that had no room for hope. The foundation Arthur wanted her to lead wasn't just an organization. It was a way to transform the kinds of communities she had grown up in, to prevent other families from suffering the way hers had. She wasn't choosing the offered marriage because she wanted it. She was choosing it because it was the door to a future where her mother could live, her sister could thrive, and she herself could finally build something meaningful. A few days after the initial meeting, Mia returned to Arthur's home. Her steps felt heavy, her heart pounding with a mixture of resolution and fear. When he opened the door, she met his eyes with a steadiness that masked the turmoil inside her. She told him she would do it. He nodded, neither triumphant nor relieved, simply acknowledging that the path ahead had been chosen. Preparations began quietly. The ceremony would be small, private, and discreet. Mia felt as though she were drifting through a dream, watching her life rearrange itself around her. She didn't yet understand how profoundly this decision would alter her existence, but she sensed the shift already, like the faint tremor before a seismic change. What she did not realize was that the hardest days were still to come, and that accepting his offer was only the first step in a journey that would test every part of who she was. The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of disbelief and quiet preparation. Mia moved through them as if she were walking underwater, aware of everything happening around her, yet detached from it in a way she couldn't fully control. There were calls to arrange the legal details, discreet conversations with Arthur's attorney, and hushed discussions with her mother and sister about the changes that were now set into motion. Every task carried a surreal quality, as though she were watching someone else live this strange and improbable chapter of her life. When the morning of the ceremony arrived, Houston lay under a soft, overcast sky. The muted light seemed to mirror Mia's emotions, neither bright nor dark, suspended in uncertainty. She dressed in a simple, elegant dress chosen by one of Arthur's staff members, someone with a gentle touch who seemed to understand that extravagance would only make Mia feel more out of place. Her mother helped zip the back, her hands trembling slightly, while her sister brushed Mia's hair with a tenderness that made her chest tighten. The ceremony took place in the small private chapel on the Lancaster estate. It wasn't ornate or intimidating. Instead, it felt intimate quiet, with tall windows that let in the soft gray light and candles arranged along the walls casting gentle flickers across the wooden floor. The handful of attendees stood scattered throughout the room. Arthur's longtime lawyer, a couple of his trusted staff members, and Mia's mother and sister who sat in the front pew. The atmosphere was solemn without being heavy, reverent without being ceremonial. There was no music, no decorations beyond what the chapel typically held, no celebration, only two lives intersecting under extraordinary circumstances. Arthur stood near the altar, wearing a dark suit that fit him loosely around the shoulders. His illness had begun to show more clearly. His posture remained dignified, but his face held a weariness that hadn't been as visible when they first met. Mia approached him slowly, her steps steady but her heart pounding. She felt neither fear nor excitement, only a deep, quiet sense of acceptance, as though she were stepping into a role that had been waiting for her long before she understood it existed. The officiant spoke gently, guiding them through the minimal rituals required to make the union legally binding. The vows were concise, the statements formal. Mia's voice wavered slightly as she repeated the words, but she did not falter. When the ceremony concluded, Arthur looked at her with a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the commitment she had made. It wasn't affection or sentimentality. It was respect and a shared recognition of what this moment meant. After the ceremony, a modest reception was held in the estate's dining room. The room was large with high ceilings and antique furniture, but the gathering itself remained understated. There was no toasting or celebration, only quiet conversation and the faint clinking of silverware as a simple meal was served. Mia sat between her mother and sister, who kept offering her small, reassuring glances. They were trying to be strong, to show support, even if they didn't fully understand the complexity of what she was stepping into. Arthur spoke briefly with Mia's mother, expressing his commitment to ensuring she received the medical care she needed. The sincerity in his tone gave Mia a sense of relief that felt both immediate and overwhelming. Her mother's illness had been a constant source of fear, a looming shadow that dictated every decision Mia made. For the first time, the shadow seemed to shift, not disappear, but move just enough to let in some light. That evening, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, Arthur asked Mia to join him in his study. The room, lined with shelves of books and neatly organized documents, had quickly become symbolic of the vast responsibilities she was about to inherit. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his desk, the same place where he had revealed the truth of his illness and made his unsettling proposal. He spoke slowly, conserving his energy as he explained what the next few weeks would look like. There were meetings she would need to attend, reports she needed to read, and individuals within the foundation she would have to meet personally. He assured her that he would guide her through everything as long as his health allowed. His voice carried a soft urgency, a man trying to pass on decades of experience in the limited time he had left. She listened intently, absorbing each instruction, each warning, each piece of wisdom. Over the next several days, Mia shifted into her new life. It felt strange to stay in the guest suite of the estate, strange to walk through halls filled with portraits of people she had never met, strange to interact with staff members who treated her with formal respect. She tried to remain grounded, reminding herself of where she came from, of her mother and sister who still lived in their small apartment despite the changes now underway. The estate was quiet, bordered by well-tended gardens that rustled softly in the afternoon breeze. Some mornings she woke early and walked the paths herself, trying to make sense of the decisions she had made. Arthur fulfilled his promise to help her family. Specialists were consulted, appointments made, tests scheduled. Her mother's treatment plan was restructured under expert care, giving Mia a glimmer of hope she hadn't dared hold on to before. As for her sister, tutors were arranged to help her prepare for college applications. Educational counselors reached out, initiating conversations about scholarships and programs that had previously felt out of reach. Mia felt gratitude so deep it almost hurt, but she also felt the weight of responsibility pressing against her ribs. Each improvement in her family's situation tied directly to a role she had agreed to assume. Arthur was patient and thorough in preparing her for that role. He spent hours showing her the inner workings of the foundation. They reviewed budgets, community initiatives, and long-term development strategies. He explained the delicate balance of maintaining public trust, managing funds ethically, and navigating political pressure. At times, the sheer volume of information overwhelmed her, but Arthur reminded her to focus on principles rather than procedures. The principles, he said, would guide her when the details felt impossible. Yet as the weeks passed, Arthur's health began to decline more rapidly. His energy waned, and he grew visibly weaker. Some days he could speak for only short periods before needing rest. Other days he could barely leave his bed. The staff adjusted their routines, speaking in hushed tones, moving with increased care. The house took on an atmosphere of gentle vigilance, as though everyone was bracing for an inevitable shift. Mia visited him regularly, sitting by his bedside with documents and questions when he had the strength to respond. He continued teaching her in fragments, small insights, warnings, and encouragements whispered between labored breaths. She found herself cherishing every moment, not because she was growing attached in ways she hadn't expected, but because she understood the significance of what he was entrusting to her. This wasn't just about filling a position, it was about preserving a legacy built on decades of intention. During one visit, he told her about a journal he had written over the years, filled with reflections on the foundation's mission, notes on community meetings, and philosophical musings about justice and architecture. He said she would find it useful when he was no longer able to guide her. She didn't fully grasp the meaning of his words until days later, when he passed quietly in his sleep. The news reached her early in the morning, a soft knock on her bedroom door, a solemn-faced staff member, a gentle message delivered with compassion. Even though she had known the moment was coming, the finality of it still struck her like a blow. She sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the grief unfold slowly, a muted sorrow mixed with the deep, aching awareness that whatever came next would be hers to face alone. In the hours that followed, the house shifted into a state of mourning. Staff members moved quietly, making necessary arrangements. Calls were placed to board members and attorneys. A few close associates of Arthur came to the estate, expressing their condolences with subdued expressions. Mia remained mostly in the background, unsure of her place during these first waves of grief. She wandered through the estate in a daze, finding small reminders of Arthur everywhere. Books he had bookmarked, notes he had left on his desk, a cup still resting near his reading chair. It wasn't until later in the day that his attorney approached her with a sealed envelope and a small key. Her name was written on the envelope in Arthur's careful handwriting. She retreated to the quiet of the study before opening it, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. The letter inside was written with a steadiness that suggested he had composed it long before his health had worsened. In it, he spoke of the trust he had placed in her, of the qualities he had recognized and believed in. He described the foundation not as a project, but as a living entity that needed someone with empathy, vision, and resolve. He reminded her that leadership was not about expertise, but about willingness to act for the good of others. He asked her to carry the mission forward, not out of duty to him, but because she understood firsthand why it mattered. The key, he explained, belonged to a vault beneath his desk, where he had kept journals, documents, and plans he wanted her to review when she felt ready. He encouraged her to trust herself, to remember that she was chosen not by chance, but because she possessed something indispensable. The letter ended with a simple message, that she was capable, that he believed she would go further than she imagined, and that the foundation was not his to give. It had always belonged to the communities it served. She was simply the next guardian. When she finished reading, tears blurred the ink until the words became soft shadows on the page. For a long while she sat there, the envelope resting in her lap, feeling a complex blend of grief, gratitude, fear, and determination. Then she reached for the vault key and unlocked the compartment beneath the desk. Inside, she found binders of reports, stacks of envelopes, and the leather-bound journal Arthur had mentioned. She opened it to the first page and saw his handwriting stretching across the lines in neat, deliberate strokes. The journal was more than a record. It was a blueprint of his philosophy, an intimate map of the Foundation's heart. There were stories of community meetings where people had expressed fears and hopes, notes on policy choices and the ethical dilemmas behind them, reflections on the difference between building structures and building trust. Mia read until her eyes burned and her chest ached. She felt as though Arthur were still speaking to her from the pages, guiding her, urging her forward. By the time she closed the journal, she knew there was no returning to the life she once had. The path ahead was steep and full of challenges, and she would be scrutinized by many who doubted her. But she also knew that she didn't walk it alone. The voices of the community, Arthur's teachings, her family's hopes, they all moved with her. The next morning, she attended her first meeting with the Foundation's senior staff and board members. The air in the conference room was thick with skepticism. A few offered condolences, while others exchanged glances that made their doubts clear. They questioned her preparedness, her experience, her capacity to lead. Yet when she read aloud the final lines of Arthur's letter, the room grew quiet. She spoke not with the confidence of someone who believed she had all the answers, but with the conviction of someone who understood the stakes. The meeting ended not in full acceptance, but in a cautious acknowledgement of her new role. They agreed to proceed under the terms Arthur had legally established, though uncertainty hung in the air, like a storm cloud waiting to break. In the days that followed, Mia immersed herself in her work. She visited projects across the city, walked through community centers, listened to staff, volunteers, and residents. She saw children learning in renovated classrooms, families attending financial literacy workshops, and small businesses receiving grants that allowed them to stay afloat. Each visit reminded her why the Foundation existed and why Arthur had chosen her. And each visit strengthened her resolve to honor his legacy, not by replicating his footsteps, but by forging her own path with the same spirit of compassion and courage that he had modeled. She was no longer the girl standing alone in the back of a gala hall, overwhelmed by a world she didn't belong to. She was the inheritor of a mission that transcended wealth and influence. She was the steward of a legacy built from hope, grit, and the belief that change was possible. As she stepped into this new chapter, she carried not only Arthur's trust, but the weight of a city's needs, and somewhere beneath the fear, she felt a growing spark of confidence that she could rise to meet them. In the weeks following that first tremulous meeting with the Foundation's board, Mia's life settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and overwhelming. The Lancaster estate had grown quieter after Arthur's passing, the halls less animated, the rooms heavy with the echo of a life now reduced to memories and handwritten notes. Yet within that quiet, something persistent pushed her forward, a sense of duty she had not chosen, but now embraced, a responsibility that had woven itself into the fabric of her days. She felt it each morning when she walked through the study where Arthur had once sat, reviewing plans and reflecting on decisions. She felt it when she looked at the journal he left behind, its pages filled with insights that bridged the gap between his vision and the reality she was now tasked with guiding. It was that journal, more than anything else, that steadied her in the weeks that followed. She read it slowly, page by page, late at night when the estate felt vast and empty around her. Arthur had written with a clarity that cut through her uncertainty, speaking directly to the challenges she now faced. His words did not promise that the path ahead would be smooth or fair. Instead, they reminded her that meaningful change came only through persistence, even when obstacles rose up like unforgiving shadows. The more she read, the more she understood that he had not chosen her on impulse, nor out of desperation. He had chosen her because he saw something he recognized, something he believed the foundation needed, a connection to the very people it served. That understanding strengthened her as she immersed herself in the operations of the foundation. She spent hours meeting with staff, walking through departments, listening to concerns about budgets, personnel shortages, and community expectations. Many of the people she spoke with treated her cautiously, their smiles polite but reserved. They were used to Arthur, his presence, his authority, his years of experience. She was young, untested, and in their eyes she had been placed in a role far beyond her qualifications. That skepticism shadowed nearly every interaction, forcing her to prove herself again and again. Still, she persisted. She made a point of being present, not behind closed doors or in executive meetings alone, but in the environments where the foundation did its work. She visited after-school programs in neighborhoods where resources were scarce, yet hope remained tenacious. She walked through renovated community centers where families gathered for tutoring sessions, job readiness workshops, and neighborhood planning meetings. She sat in rooms filled with volunteers and coordinators who devoted themselves to projects with passion that far exceeded the modest salaries they earned. She talked to small business owners who benefited from microgrants, parents who had learned to navigate housing assistance, and students who proudly described their scholarship applications. Every conversation affirmed that the foundation was an ecosystem built not on money alone but on trust, something fragile, something that could easily fracture if the leadership lost sight of the people it aimed to serve. Mia understood that better than anyone. She had lived in those neighborhoods, stood in those long lines for resources, watched her family struggle under the weight of medical bills and precarious housing. That lived experience became her compass as she began shaping her approach to the role, guiding her through moments when she felt in danger of losing her footing. Yet not everyone appreciated that perspective. As she grew more visible in her leadership position, criticism emerged with sharper edges. Some donors questioned her youth and inexperience. They doubted whether she could maintain the stability the foundation had enjoyed under Arthur's direction. Newspapers published pieces speculating about her sudden rise to power, questioning whether she had been manipulated or whether she had manipulated the situation herself. Social media echoed the same uncertainties, some voices kind and supportive, others harsh and dismissive. Mia felt those doubts like stones pressing into her chest. But she also remembered her mother's steady gaze, her sister's optimism, and Arthur's unwavering belief that she would choose the right path even when it was difficult. She refused to let the detractions of strangers dictate her next steps. Instead, she poured her energy into learning, reading reports late into the night, cross-referencing data, asking questions of anyone who could provide insight. She educated herself on the intricacies of nonprofit management, community development, and urban planning, using her architecture background as a bridge. Slowly, the sense of drowning began to recede, replaced by cautious confidence. Her first major challenge came sooner than she expected. At one of the routine quarterly reviews, she noticed that a long-standing project had been repeatedly delayed, a vocational training center in one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. Funding allocations had been approved over a year earlier, yet construction remained incomplete. The report cited bureaucratic hurdles, contractor issues, and permit delays. But as she dug deeper, she found inconsistencies in the information provided. Meetings had been postponed repeatedly, and communication between departments had faltered. It was clear that the project had stalled, and no one had taken decisive steps to resolve the issues. The center had been important to Arthur. He had written about it several times in his journal, describing it as a cornerstone project intended to provide not just education, but stability and hope for families struggling to break cycles of generational hardship. Mia felt a renewed determination growing inside her. This was something she could not allow to languish. Without public trust and visible impact, the foundation risked losing its identity and its ability to uplift those who needed it most. She began by arranging on-site visits, requesting detailed updates from project managers and contractors. The first visit to the half-finished building left her both disheartened and motivated. The structure stood partially completed, surrounded by debris and equipment that had been left unused for months. Local residents approached her cautiously during the visit, asking when the center would open, explaining how desperately they needed training programs and job opportunities. Their questions, tinged with disappointment and resignation, fueled her resolve. In the weeks that followed, she pushed the project relentlessly forward. She organized meetings between departments, resolved contractual disagreements, and worked with city officials to clear the backlog of delayed permits. When a contractor failed to meet deadlines, she made the difficult decision to terminate the agreement and bring in a more reliable team. It was her first major assertion of authority, a decision that created waves within the foundation and alarmed some board members. But she held firm, citing negligence and the need to honor the foundation's commitments to the community. As progress resumed, Mia visited the site every week, sometimes standing among workers in a hard hat and borrowed construction boots, asking questions and learning about the process. She listened not only to supervisors but also to crew members, trying to understand the practical setbacks and challenges. Her presence gradually shifted from an anomaly to an expectation, and over time, the workers began to greet her with respect rather than curiosity. While she fought for the project behind the scenes, donors continued scrutinizing her every move. At a fundraising event, a prominent donor approached her with a mixture of concern and skepticism, warning her that she was being too bold, too ambitious, too reliant on instinct rather than experience. Mia listened calmly, understanding that their doubts came not from malice, but from discomfort with change. But she also recognized that she could not lead effectively if she abandoned her principles to appease others. Behind closed doors, some board members expressed similar worries. They feared that her decisions would jeopardize long-standing relationships or destabilize funding streams. Yet when she presented her data clearly and made the case for the center's importance, even the skeptics found themselves begrudgingly accepting her logic. She was proving, piece by piece, that she was capable not only of understanding the foundation's mission, but of advancing it. By the time the center neared completion, it had become the defining project of her early tenure. The building transformed from a dormant shell into a vibrant community hub, with classrooms, workshops, computer labs, and open multi-purpose rooms ready to accommodate training programs in diverse trades. The day before the grand opening, she walked through the nearly finished halls alone, running her fingers lightly along the smooth walls. She inhaled the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. The space felt alive, filled with the promise of futures not yet written. The grand opening drew a diverse crowd of residents, city officials, donors, and members of the press. For many in attendance, it was their first time seeing Mia lead publicly. She felt the weight of 100 eyes upon her as she stepped toward the podium, the cutting ribbon gleaming behind her in the sunlight. She took a breath, steadying herself, and began to speak, not with theatrics or flourish, but with honesty. She spoke about the community, about the foundation's purpose, about the need for equity in education and opportunity. She acknowledged the challenges that had delayed the project and the responsibility of the foundation to see it through. She referenced Arthur's vision and his belief in people who were too often overlooked, and, without saying it explicitly, she spoke of her own journey, woven into every word she shared. The applause that followed felt sincere and warm, washing over her with a surprising sense of relief. As people filed into the building afterward, exploring the classrooms and meeting instructors, she felt a quiet pride settle over her. It wasn't triumph or vindication. It was something gentler, something deeper, a sense that she had taken one crucial step toward fulfilling the promise she had made to Arthur and to herself. In the days that followed the opening, she noticed subtle shifts in the way people interacted with her. Members of the staff greeted her with less reserve. Board members asked her opinion on issues they might once have shielded from her. Donors began to speak with interest about new projects, curious to hear her perspective. The media, too, published articles praising the center's impact and highlighting her leadership in bringing it to fruition. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Mia herself. She no longer saw her role through the lens of fear or uncertainty. The burden of responsibility was still heavy, but it no longer felt like something foreign placed upon her shoulders. Instead, it felt like a part of her identity, something she had grown into through effort, struggle, and perseverance. Late one evening, when the estate had settled into its usual nighttime quiet, Mia walked into Arthur's study. The air felt still, touched by the lingering presence of the man who had trusted her to continue what he started. She approached the desk, where his journal lay neatly closed, and ran her fingers along its worn edges. She could almost imagine him sitting beside her, offering silent guidance as he had so many times before. She sat in his chair and looked at the photograph of him on the corner of the desk, a picture taken years earlier, before illness had taken its toll. He stood in front of a community center similar to the one she had just completed, smiling in a way that revealed his pride in the work. Mia took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. She knew she would face challenges ahead: opposition, new projects, new demands. But she also knew that she was ready. She had earned her place not because of a legal arrangement or a stroke of fate, but because she had embraced the responsibility placed before her and proven her ability to carry it. In the quiet warmth of the study, she made a silent promise to Arthur, to the foundation, to the city, and to herself. She would protect the mission he had built. She would honor the trust he had placed in her, and she would work tirelessly to ensure that the opportunities they created would reach the people who needed them most. This was no longer just Arthur's legacy, it was hers too. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new video. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it, and check out our other stories waiting for you on the channel. See you in the next video.